Chapter 4, Loneliness. The next day was rainy and dark. Rain fell on the roof of the barn and dripped steadily from the eaves. Rain fell in the barnyard and ran in crooked courses down into the lane where thistles and pigweed grew. Rain spattered against Mrs. Zuckerman's kitchen windows and came gushing out of the downspouts. Rain fell on the backs of the sheep as they gazed in the meadow. When the sheep were tired of standing in the rain, they walked slowly up the lane and into the fold. Rain upset Wilbur's plans. Wilbur had planned to go out this day and dig a new hole in the yard. He had other plans too. His plans for the day went something like this. Breakfast at 6:30, skim milk crusts, middlings, bits of donuts, wheat cakes with drops of maple syrup sticking to them, potato skins, leftover custard pudding with raisins, and bits of shredded wheat. Breakfast would be finished at 7. From 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Templeton, the rat that lived underneath his trough. Talking with Templeton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than nothing. From 8 to 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap outdoors in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig a hole or trench and possibly find something good to eat buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, he planned to stand still and watch flies on the boards, watch bees in the clover, and watch swallows in the air. 12 o'clock, lunchtime. Middlings, warm water, apple parings, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scraps, stale hominy, and the wrapper of a package of cheese. Lunch would be over at 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. From 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places by rubbing them against the fence. From 3 to 4, he planned to stand perfectly still and think of what it was like to be alive and to wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper. Skim milk, provender, leftover sandwich from Lurvy's lunchbox, prune skins, a morsel of this, a bit of that, fried potatoes, marmalades, drippings, a little more of this and a little more of that. A piece of baked apple, a scrap of upside-down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans. He woke at 6 and saw the rain, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. I get everything all beautifully planned out, and it has to go in rain, he said. For a while, he stood gloomily indoors. Then he walked to the door and looked out. Drops of rain struck his face. His yard was cold and wet. His trough had an inch of rainwater in it. Templeton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Templeton?" called Wilbur. There was no answer. Suddenly, Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. "One day, just like another," he groaned. "I'm very young. I have no real friends here in the barn. It's going to rain all morning and all afternoon, and Fern won't come in such bad weather. Oh, honestly." And Wilbur was crying again for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard the banging of a pail. Lurvy was standing outside in the rain, stirring up breakfast. "Come on, pig," said Lurvy. Wilbur did not budge. Lurvy dumped the slop, scraped the pail, and walked away. He noticed that something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. He mentioned this to the goose, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the sheepfold. "Will you come over and play with me?" he asked. "Sorry, Ari," said the goose. "I'm sitting on my eggs, 8 of them. Got to keep them toasty warm. I have to stay right here. I'm no flibberty-ibberty-gibbet. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings." "Well, I didn't think you were expecting woodpeckers," said Wilbur bitterly. That means angrily. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. "Will you please play with me?" he asked. "Certainly not," said the lamb. "In the first place, I cannot get into your pen, as I am not old enough to jump over the fence. In the second place, I am not interested in pigs. Pigs mean less than nothing to me." "What do you mean less than nothing?" replied Wilbur. "I don't think there's anything such thing as less than nothing. Nothing is absolutely the limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can something be less than nothing? If there were something that was less than nothing, then nothing would be nothing, and it would be something, even though it's just a very little bit of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that is less than it." "Ugh, be quiet," said the lamb. "Go play by yourself. I don't play with pigs." Sadly, Wilbur lay down and listened to the rain. Soon he saw the rat climbing out of the slanting board that he used as a stairway. "Will you play with me, Templeton?" asked Wilbur. "Play?" said Templeton, twirling his whiskers. "Play? I hardly know the meaning of the word." "Well," said Wilbur, "it means to have fun and frolic and run and skip and be merry." "I never do those things if I can avoid them," replied the rat sourly. "I prefer to spend the time eating, gnawing, spying, and hiding." "I'm a glutton, but not a merry maker. Right now I am on my way to your trough to eat your breakfast, since you haven't got the sense to eat it yourself." And Templeton the rat crept stealthily along the wall and disappeared into the private tunnel that he had dug between the door and the trough in Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled himself to get from one barn to his hiding place under the pig trough without coming out into the pen. He had tunnels and runways all over Mr. Zuckerman's farm, and he could get from one place to another without being seen. Usually he slept during the daytime and was awake only after dark. Wilbur watched him disappear into his tunnel. In a moment he saw the rat's sharp nose poke from the underneath the wooden trough. Cautiously, Templeton pulled himself up over the edge of the trough. This was almost more than Wilbur could stand, on this dreary rainy day, to see his breakfast being eaten by somebody else. He knew Templeton was getting soaked out there in the pouring rain, but even that didn't comfort him. Friendless, dejected, and hungry, he threw himself down in the manure pile and he sobbed. That means he cried. Later that afternoon, Lurvy went to Mr. Zuckerman. "I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hasn't even touched his food." "Give him 2 spoonfuls of sulfur and a little molasses," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him when Lurvy caught him and forced the medicine down his throat. This was certainly the worst day of his life. He didn't know whether he could endure this awful loneliness anymore. Darkness settled over everything. Soon there were only shadows and noises of the sheep chewing their cuds, and occasionally the rattle of a cow chain up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when out of the darkness came a small voice he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin and pleasant. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur?" it said. "I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day and I like you." "But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping up to his feet. "Where are you and who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Go to sleep and you'll see me in the morning." And there's Wilbur crying because he's so upset because he's friendless. All right, that was chapter 4. Chapter 5 is called Charlotte, who I think might be his friend, but we'll have to wait and see. Bye, guys.